Hello, fine people of the internet and YouTube or anybody that's watching this video. If you know me or you know anything about me, you know I like fixing things and I love tools. Especially I love tools, especially tools that are new, innovative, something different, something you can't use. But what do we have here? Well, if you're looking at it and you think, well, that's just a threaded rod with two nuts on the end. Well, that's exactly what it is. It's a threaded rod with two nuts on the end. So what are we looking at here? What's so fancy about this tool? Well, actually, that's the point. There's nothing fancy about this tool. What it is actually a clutch puller for Polaris clutches. Now, why am I showing you this? A threaded rod with two nuts on the end. Anybody can make this. Yes, anybody can make this. But for some reason, I don't see very many people making something like this, and it's really not that hard to make, and I don't know why you would actually go out and purchase the Polaris clutch tool. Okay, let me make this very clear why I did this and why you could do this and why it works. Well, a Polaris clutch tool is a tool that you use to stick in. Here's a Polaris clutch that I just pulled out with this tool. You stick a tool into it, and you basically thread it into, because there's a thread on the inside of that, and you basically stick an impact gun on it, and it pushes the clutch off by pulling this end. All right. Now, I've looked for the clutch tool because I wanted to order one because I didn't have one, and I figured, well, how expensive can these things be? Well, actually, they're fairly expensive. Where my local Polaris dealership, they were offering me an aftermarket clutch tool, and it was $52 plus tax, plus shipping, $10 freight shipping. So after everything's said and done, it would be close to $70. So that seemed a little ridiculous to me. And the worst part was I actually had to wait a few days to use the tool, and I needed that clutch off right away. So what I did is I was lucky, because what happened was there was a little plastic bushing in here that had melted apart, and it still works as a bushing, but it actually melted onto the thread, so I could actually see what the thread was. So I took that bushing and I matched the threads and the size, and it turns out, if you're watching this video, you're actually going to get lucky, because I'm going to tell you exactly what thread and what size of threaded rod you should use. What you're going to need is you're going to need a 3/4 inch threaded rod with 16 threads per inch. So it's a fine thread. It's a standard fine thread, and that's all it is. Here it is. Here's the other big half of the threaded rod that I took. So you can take a look at the tag and see exactly what it is. So there it is, 3/4-16, so 16 threads per inch and 36 inches long. So it's a 3-foot threaded rod. And I didn't need all 3 feet. I needed a little portion of it. I was going to use the full 3 feet and then just kind of use the threaded rod for whatever, but I figured whatever. I'll make this tool separately, and I'll keep it in my toolbox separately. But that's really all you need. Is you don't need anything fancy. You just need a threaded rod with two nuts on the end. And I was going to weld these two nuts on, but I like having the option of taking these nuts off and then using this threaded rod for some other purpose. So I'm having multiple purposes. I love tools with multi-purpose. But for this particular moment in time, the only thing this tool is going to be used for is pulling clutches off of Polaris ATVs and Polaris quads. In this case, it was a quad. So I'm curious to see. I doubt it works on the Yamaha ones, because they have a couple of Yamaha clutches kicking around, and I'll tell you if it works or not. But I doubt it does work. But apparently, this tool will work for pretty much all Polaris clutches. There's a few Sportsman 550s, I think, and 650s that it doesn't work on. Very few machines, but I think all your Trail Bosses, your Sportsmans, most of your sleds, this will work for all of them. So it's a nice tool to have. Very simple to make. I just cut, and the one thing you notice, the only thing I did different than just using a straight threaded rod is when I actually chamfered, I cut the threads off the end a little bit, and there was one particular purpose I did that for is only the fact that the rod is a little soft. So what happens is when you thread it in, I was worried that and it would, because it mushroomed on the end of it. So if you had the thread on it and it mushroomed the end of it, you probably would not be able to pull the threaded rod out at the end. So I cut the threads off the end down a little bit, so when it does mushroom, I can still pull it off the end. And if it starts to mushroom some more, I'll just keep cutting it down, and this tool will last me probably more clutch pulls than I ever need to use. So as long as I don't lose it. And the great part is, this cost me altogether, I got the 3-foot threaded rod, 3 nuts. Again, make sure you got the matching nuts, the fine thread nuts. 3 nuts. I didn't need 3 nuts, I only needed 2 nuts. Everything cost me $13 after tax. And I got threaded rod left over, and I can use this for something else. So big price difference, and I got it right away because I just went to my local hardware store, which is a great store, and it has everything I need for farm equipment. So big 3/4 inch for threaded rod, not a big deal, had a big stack of them. So you might not be so lucky with your local hardware store, but I happen to be. So that's all you need. Really, all you need. It has, I noticed that that tool has like a big chunk of not threaded portion on the front end. You don't need that. You really don't. It worked just fine for me. It took me 2 seconds, and if you tighten these nuts off nice and tight, you won't have a problem with it spinning. I did notice that if you don't tighten these nuts tight enough, it will spin, because it is quite a bit of force you need to pull that clutch off. But yeah, save yourself some money. Go get yourself a threaded rod, a couple of nuts, and if you have a chop saw like I do, cut it. Grinding wheel works good. If you don't, try to get a shorter piece of threaded rod. You could buy the tool. Just, I don't know. It depends. They say it's hardened. The salesperson at the Polaris dealership just said a threaded rod probably won't work because it's hardened. It'll just mushroom and it won't work. It worked for me. It probably will work for you, and it'll probably continue to work for me. So only thing is, just make sure you always cut the mushroom end off of it. Once, if it mushrooms at the end of here, just clean it off, because that will catch if you try to pull the rod out, which won't be a big deal because you can just keep threading. Even if it does catch, you can thread it all the way through the clutch and then just clean it off when it's sticking through the clutch, and then it'll come out afterwards. So not the end of the world. There, save yourself some money. Polaris clutch pulling tool for under $15. All right. One final note before I let you guys go and run off and make this tool yourself. If you've cut threaded rod before, like just chop saw the threaded rod or chamfered either ends of threaded rod or buggered up the end of a threaded rod, you'll understand this. But if you don't, if you've never done this before, this will be kind of a new topic for you. And it's a good thing to note, because I want you guys to be successful when making this tool. I don't want you guys to go buy out threaded rod and then not be able to make the tool, because this will happen to you. Okay, before you chamfer or cut or bugger up the ends of the threaded rod here, what you want to do is you want to make sure your nut is threaded onto the rod. And this is important, because what happens is when you cut those threads, it's going to flatten a bunch of threads, so you won't be able to put the nut on afterwards. But if the nut's already on, what you can do, as the nut comes off, it actually cuts the threads back into that threaded rod. So if you see here, some of these threads, they're brought up from underneath, is because that nut cut them on the way out. So that's what you want to do. So see, it threads on nicely, no problem. But if you tried to put that nut on from the end after you had cut, either cut the end of that threaded rod, like on this end, or chamfered it, sort of a chamfer, not really much of a chamfer here, you're going to not be able to put the nut back on. So make sure the nut is on the threaded rod before you cut it, or before you do anything to the threaded rod, because it's going to be very difficult and to do it without a tap. This way you can do it without a tap. You can just unthread the nut, and as you unthread the nut, it'll cut the threads back in. It'll be hard to do it the first time, but after that, it'll be no problem. Simple and easy. Got it? Good. Make sure you do it like that. And yeah, I like to make sure after I cut the threaded rod, this end, it'll end up like this. Like imagine trying to thread it onto that. It just won't work, right? So I like to take it on a grinder and chamfer the ends. So basically just make a 45-degree cut to make it kind of more or less like this end out of the, like when you first get the threaded rod. And then you can pull the nut off, and then it'll come easy on and off. And then these two nuts, if you don't know what this is basically a lock nut. I've turned these nuts against each other really hard so that they lock in place, so that these nuts don't move. They don't want to come apart. So yeah, now you got enough information to make this simple tool, and hopefully you've got all the necessities to make it. So there you go. Have fun.